So, knowing what you know from that process, you can then begin to translate that information into tangible roles, people who can help connect the person to those roles, and places where those roles can be inhabited. So, to use Joel as an example, from our discovery work, we knew that Joel was a social justice oriented person. So, we started looking around at different social justice initiatives in the city. We tend to find that the more local something is, the easier it is to make connections with people. If possible, local is better. We looked through community event calendars. You might find these in newspapers, on the internet, meetup.com. For us, Do 502 is a really good one. And we found out about this event called the Mighty Kindness Earth Day Hoot. And it was from going to this festival that was focused on how to treat the planet that Joel discovered he was really interested in environmentalism. And so we began to look for other events in the city focused on this particular subject. Now, here is an important place to clarify a few things. Most organizations that provide support to people with disabilities tend to stop their footwork around this point, around community presence. Once they find a space where a person with a disability is welcome, they start bringing multiple clients into that space. Now, this only reinforces that the presence in this space is contrived, kind of like a field trip, and it discourages genuine interaction with other citizens. When you have an entire bus full of people with disabilities coming to an event, it actively keeps everyday citizens from interacting with an individual you support. This is part of the reason community access is done on a 1-to-1 ratio. It is designed to help people build genuine relationships with valued citizens in the community, and to make more visible the inherent social value of the person being supported. Oftentimes, support organizations will take people they support to events that are geared toward disability. Special needs bowling, or sensory-friendly movie day, or disability ministries at a church. The problem with using these as community access is that it still reinforces disability as the life-defining trait for that person. Activities that occur in those spaces are usually passive, and that reinforces the idea that people with disabilities cannot be active or contribute in a genuine way. It also reinforces that people with disabilities should be seen in groups and not as individuals with individual wants and needs. And while presence is good in typical community places, it by itself isn't enough to combat the isolation and loneliness that people feel oftentimes. True incorporation in community means being a valued, contributory member of it. It means getting your hands dirty. So Joel now has this role of environmentalist, and once we have a potential role identified, we can use what we call role communicators to flesh out what being an environmentalist might look like. Role communicators are things that identify what type of role a person is playing, and it comprises place, people, participation, possessions, and prose. So we ask the first question, what places does an environmentalist spend his time? So Joel and I scoured the internet and we found universities that were doing research on sustainability. We found vegan cooking classes at community centers, community gardens, restaurants that source their food locally, an annual conference called the Sustainability Summit, and churches whose congregations were committed to using more sustainable practices. I think you get the idea. Another question might be, what kind of activities might an environmentalist accomplish? Once again, Joel and I got on the internet and found higher learning classes at local colleges. We found information about how to rent space in a community garden. We found volunteer sign-ups for a farm. We saw that a film about plant-based diets was coming to our local theater with a panel discussion following the film. Other questions would be, what people would an environmentalist spend their time with? What possessions might an environmentalist have that cues others into that role that they're part of? What prose or language does an environmentalist use? For an example, they might refer to something sustainable as green, or they might spend a lot of time talking about renewable energy resources. They would probably have lots of opinions about mountaintop removal. I think another important piece in this to take away is notice that Joel and I together were going on the internet and looking up these things. It wasn't my responsibility to do that on my own time, or Joel's responsibility to do that on his own time. We were both sharing that responsibility together. And so, with all this information gathering, we suddenly had many, many places to start looking to plug Joel in. And none of them, not a single one, had to do with disability. We were no longer worried about how we were going to spend our time working together. The new worry was whether or not we were ever going to have enough time to explore all of those possibilities.